transferring an image to a linoleum block. So if I don't want to draw directly on top of the block and I kind of want to plan out my image before I get started on carving or setting up to carve, what I can do is I can trace or transfer my drawing onto the plate using some of these methods I'm going to show you here. So one of the first things that would be important is to remember that the image will reverse on you. So you need to figure that out if you're okay with the image actually reversing. So right here I am tracing out my actual block size so that I know what my final image size is going to be. This doesn't account for paper size or anything like that when we get to printing, but I know that my image is going to be the same size as my block. So I can create my sketch within that space. If I am concerned about the way it will print in reverse, remember I would need to trace this on the back of that plate, so that on the back of that newsprint, so that when I transfer it, it is reversed on my block, so that when I print, it comes back the way that I want it. So here I'm cutting this down, my sketch, down to the plate size plus a couple inches at one end, so I have something to tape down to the table. Because I'm going to hinge my drawing onto the table and put the block underneath as I'm demonstrating here. So then I'm going to use a transfer sheet to transfer the image. So you'd make a sheet of this if necessary. I have a couple different things that I could use here. I have like a blue transfer sheet that's a pre-made thing, and then a red iron oxide sheet. But your other options with some stuff you might have at home is I have a stick of charcoal here, or a 6B pencil. 6B or higher pencil will work. So if I just rub the charcoal in a nice even film over the sheet of newsprint that I want to use as a transfer sheet, or if I could do the same thing with the 6B pencil, then it'll work the same as those pre-made transfer sheets that I have off to the side there. So now what I want to do is I want to tape that down, and this is just to demonstrate that yes, indeed, when you put this under here, that these lines will transfer and work. So I just trace over my sketch on the back, and all those lines should transfer onto the block itself, which I'm pointing out here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my actual block that I plan on carving here, and I am going to do the same thing where I'm cutting down the edges. I need at least 3 edges to make sure that I'm lining this up accurately with my block, which will go underneath. So once again, I have that like extra inch at the top edge, extra inch or 2 inches. And then I'm gonna tape this down. I don't need to line up the block under here yet, so I'm gonna tape down my sketch to the table with tape in a couple spots so that it hinges. Don't just tape right in the middle, otherwise this is gonna get all crooked. So now I'm gonna line up the block using my cut edges as my guidelines for where it lines up. And then this way I can work on the transfer. I can flip this back, make sure lines are transferring, and then go back to it. So I'm going to place a transfer sheet face down in between my sketch and the plate so that I'm transferring that blue material or red material or graphite, whatever you use, onto the plate itself. So here I'm using a ballpoint pen because it has a nice solid point that'll make sure all these lines transfer over really crisply. And so here I'm just going to go over and make sure that I hit all those marks that are important for me as guidelines for my image. There's other ways that you can transfer as well. This is kind of the most straightforward way to do it. And so that's why I'm showing this here. If you're using a press, we can kind of take out the double tracing methods and just trace our sketch with like a 6B or 8B pencil, and it'd actually transfer the graphite over. But if you're just working from home, this is a really easy way to get the image onto your block. So occasionally what I want to do is, if I'm not sure if I've gotten all my lines, I'll flip that back and make sure that the image is fully transferred. If I have missed something, then what I can do here is just kind of hit those final lines and make sure that everything I have as information that I need is there and available to me. Typically I don't trace out many of the shadows or any of my hatching at this point. I really am just looking to get the main kind of guidelines transferred over to the block, and then I can work out some of those finer details once my outline is there. So I'm satisfied with this here, so now I'm gonna follow some other steps. So I'm gonna outline the entire image in Sharpie. This can be done really loosely or it can be highly detailed. You can see examples here of Tom Huck's work, which is pretty detailed with cross-hatching. Mazat and Swoon, you have a very different kind of approach to fine lines versus something that's a little bit looser. So your drawing style should be able to come through here. I've traced over some of this, and what I'm showing you now is that carving in the gray linoleum blocks is actually really hard to see what I actually carved. And I like to have a little bit more contrast when I carve and be able to identify what my white space is gonna be, AKA the carved space, and what areas will print, which is the areas that you have not taken away from the block. So you can see when I carve into this, it's really apparent what I'm carving out, and that contrast really stands out for me. So I know what will print and what won't print. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna tone my linoleum block with some old acrylic ink. I'm using old silkscreen ink in this case, and it doesn't matter what color you choose, like red and blue work really well, or green, however you wanna do it, whatever makes sense to your brain. If you use black, you might end up covering up some of your Sharpie marks and make it a little bit hard to see what you're actually carving. So I'm just gonna dip my paper towel in this old acrylic ink, and I'm just gonna rub it over the surface until I have a nice even film, no chunks left behind. It's really just like kind of minimally toning the block so that I really see that contrast when I'm working on carving. You can see I used water, just plain water, to kind of dilute this if the ink happens to be kind of thick or chunky, or if you were using like old acrylic paint that was kind of thick and chunky. We really want like a thin layer that's not going to disrupt the surface of this. So I'm just really evening that out and toning it out, so I have a nice even color across this, and then I'll just let this dry, and then I can proceed to carving. You could wait to do the Sharpie bits and transfer bits after you've toned the block, so it's up to you which order you do this in. I always kind of like to draw with the Sharpie and then tone afterwards. So now when I carve this, I get my head out of the way, you'll see that those marks are much more apparent, and it's easier to see what I actually am working on. So the next video is me walking you through the speedball carving tools.